And we are on air live and kind of floating out here on the brink of eternity. So that's us. An interesting region of the universe to go and hang out in and check things out because we have scripted a universe that is so confining. And so when you get to the outer edges, you start to get that taste of eternity. And wow, it tastes pretty decent. So how are you this morning, Stephen?
Feeling quite eternal here, Chris. Feeling good. It's a great, beautiful morning with, again, another beautiful view here in Mesa Grande. And we finally have the internet running well. As you were saying about this limited universe, I think you should really write a book called On the Brink of Eternity, by the way. That would be a great book title.
That sounds like inspiration, so perhaps I will have to pursue that, tap into the Holy Spirit and let him use me as, or let it use me as a hollow bone and bring through some kind of big adventure that mankind has never experienced before. Who knows?
That sounds very exciting.
Well, we have been working on the manual for teachers, and we finished up section 4. So now we are about ready to dive into section 5, how is healing accomplished? And this first little sentence that introduces the first section is really very profound and one of the most important ideas that the course shares. Says healing involves an understanding of what the illusion of sickness is for. Healing is impossible without this. So anytime that you are experiencing sickness or illness on any level, it really isn't what it appears to be. And so we're going to dive into this section and find out, why do we allow ourselves to become sick, to become ill, when God's will for us is perfection? God created us to be in that ongoing state of perfection. So you want to start us off here, Stephen?
Sure, yeah. So the first section of this section, subsection, says the perceived purpose of sickness. And it reads off, healing is accomplished the instant the sufferer no longer sees any value in pain. Who would choose suffering unless he thought it brought him something, and something of value to him? He must think it is a small price to pay for something of greater worth. For sickness is an election, a decision. It is the choice of weakness, in the mistaken conviction that it is strength. When this occurs, real strength is seen as threat and health as danger. Sickness is a method, conceived in madness, for placing God's Son on his Father's throne. God is seen as outside, fierce and powerful, eager to keep all power for himself. Only by his death can he be conquered by his Son. Have some crude imagery there too, to give us an idea of how the mind works when it's encompassed by insanity.
Yeah, it is kind of an insidious process that we have created here. And it's all because we wanted to believe that we created ourselves. We wanted to take that authority away from God. So what's interesting is that this really does parallel a lot of stories in both the Old and New Testament about the Son of God wanting to, displace God's creation in a state of rebellion. And even though this was only a momentary thought, it did create quite a grand panorama as to this idea of a huge battle being waged in the heavens as well as here on earth.
Yeah, and so that's already some sort of deviation from you know, God's perfect nature, right? Because it's sort of like you have to take some sort of drug like fear or guilt or the belief in sin in order to even believe there's someone you could attack, that someone deserves your attack.
Right. And more importantly, the whole idea of God being defensive is, you know, really highlighted here. I mean, God has no reason to defend himself, to condemn his creation for its presumed rebellion. This is all just a fantasy that is playing out in our mind, but it's certainly not playing out in God's mind. God is oblivious to this whole idea of there having been, you know, an insurrection that tore heaven apart.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a totally foreign idea in God and in love. You know, you're just being love, and the idea of attack is so far out of the mind.
Exactly. Only an ego could have any thoughts along those lines and actually believe that it is real. So going on, pardon me, going on to the second paragraph here, it says, and what in this insane conviction does healing stand for? It symbolizes the defeat of God's Son and the triumph of his Father over him. It represents the ultimate defiance in a direct form which the Son of God is forced to recognize. It stands for all that he would hide from himself to protect his life. If he is healed, he is responsible for his thoughts. And if he is responsible for his thoughts, he will be killed to prove to him how weak and pitiful he is. But if he chooses death himself, his weakness is his strength. Now he has given himself what God would give to him, and thus entirely usurped the throne of his creator. So we can see how incredibly perverse the thought system that created this universe actually is. It is such a miscomprehension or misinterpretation of the idea of God being a loving God and of his creation living in that ecstatic state of being identical to him. So we've got, you know, kind of a standoff that we have built up, that we have forced into being. So the reason that we allow ourselves to become ill and to fall into, you know, ruin of any sort, because healing the mind is the whole point of the course, and that will heal all the conditions that are out of a state of perfection. In other words, it's more than just the physical body's health. It can also be your financial body's well-being, or, you know, it shows up in a multitude of different ways. But it's all this chameleon game that the ego is constantly engaged in to try and keep you addicted to the idea that you have sinned, God is pissed off, and that you're going to ultimately get squashed by his thumb like a bug.
Yeah, it always feels like it's always just about coming back to the true meaning of of love. I mean, because that's really what God is. God is love, and so when we're created like God, or created by love, then really it's about coming back to that meaning, like remembering that love would never want to punish, that love would never see us as having sinned, love would never see us as guilty. And so when you come back to that love, then it's like this breaking free of all these different preconditioned ways of looking at things.
Yeah, and the thing that contributes to all of this is we've got a timeline that we're stuck in. So when we go back and review the past, we've got all these stories about sin and Cain and Abel and getting thrown out of the garden and snakes and apples. And although it wasn't, in truth, in the Bible, the apple was never actually mentioned. It was the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so, that could have been a pear, it could have been a kumquat, but we're not entrenched in the idea of the apple. But nonetheless, all of our mythology, all of our history, all of our biblical text that goes back and centers itself around the idea of man and God becoming separate is what keeps this nonsense rolling forward. And so that's what we're here to do, is to confront this and get past it, get over it, and heal that breach so that everybody is restored to truth.
Absolutely. And so, are we on? So you read the second paragraph. We're on the second section now.
Yeah, we're on the shift in perception.
The shift in perception. Healing must occur in exact proportion to which the valuelessness of sickness is recognized. One need but say, there is no gain at all to me in this, and he is healed. But to say this, one first must recognize certain facts. First, it is obvious that decisions are of the mind, not of the body. If sickness is but a faulty problem-solving approach, it is a decision. And if it is a decision, it is the mind, not the body, that makes it. The resistance to recognizing this is enormous, because the existence of the world as you perceive it depends on the body being the decision maker. Terms like instincts, reflexes, and the like represent attempts to endow the body with non-mental motivators. Actually, such terms merely state or describe the problem. They do not answer it. That was a really beautiful and enlightening passage for me to read when I was first reading it, because I realized that whereas before my mind was endowing my body with certain traits of itself, I realized that that was just a cover up for what was going on in my unconscious mind, and a way that my mind could project those, what it didn't want to own itself onto the body. So really, I mean, our body doesn't really actually have its own decision-making process. It doesn't have its own function outside of the mind. Right.
The body is basically a projection of an idea, and about 120 years ago, Mary Baker Eddy said there is no life, intelligence, content, or form in matter. And of course, the body is made up of matter. So in truth, the body does not have life. It seems to exhibit life, but the reality is it is merely a mental construct. So when you're running around talking about the wisdom of the body, and the body made me happy, or the body made me miserable, all of that sort of thing, it's a chameleon's game. It is changing colors, changing shapes. And if you're trying to fix it from the level of the body, you may get, one thing resolved, and 6 months or a year later, something else comes up. And it's always this game of putting out forest fires that are raging inside the body. So that's why it's very important to really work on that idea that the material world is not real. It is merely a veil that we have placed in front of the truth. And so the only way to lift the veil is to go beyond the physical realm and enter into that sacred union with the realm of spirit, the realm of Christ and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and it's remembering that idea that we really don't have to go anywhere because it's really within us. And so when you consider the body, the Course talks about how the body is actually outside of you. And so when your mind holds a certain thought system, And if it doesn't want to accept the responsibility for it, a lot of times it just projects it onto the body, because the body is like a scapegoat for the things that we don't want to own ourselves. And so we say this, like, it's like really commonly accepted in our culture, in this world, to say, oh, my body is feeling this, my body is feeling that. It's actually coming from your mind. It's actually coming from you.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and so when you remember that, then it's a subtle way of giving away your power, to blame it on the body, but it is in fact giving away your power. So if you can just remember that and reclaim that power, and remember you do have the power of decision in yourself.
Yes, it's stepping out of the victim state. I am a victim of this person or that person. I'm a victim of the government. I'm the victim of religion. And then most intimately, I am a victim of my body. And I am going to ride my body down as it goes down in flames. So we really have to be alert to that constant dialogue that our ego brings up around issues around the body. And once you start really looking at that, then you can live in a state of comfort within the body, because you're no longer projecting all of your fears and all of your anger and all of your frustration onto the body.
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you want to read the next paragraph?
Yes, we will go on here to paragraph 2. The acceptance of sickness as a decision of the mind for a purpose for which it would use the body is the basis of healing. And this is so for healing in all forms. So it's not just confined to having a boil on your butt. There are other things that are involved in this. A patient decides that this is so, and he recovers. If he decides against recovery, he will not be healed. Who is the physician? Only the mind of the patient himself. The outcome is what he decides that it is. Special agents seem to be ministering to him, yet they but give form to his own choice. So that is how modern medicine works. When you do the chemotherapy and go through all of those hideous experiences, you are in fact doing a form of penance and allowing the doctor to tell your mind that it's okay to be healed. But really the mind is the core of the process. It goes on to say he chooses them in order to bring tangible form to his desires. So you're still avoiding confronting the reality that you created the sickness and then you turned around and healed it. And it is this they do and nothing else. So, your insurance premiums that you're paying are just kind of background noise there that you can stop and give a thought to. They are not actually needed at all. The patient could merely rise up without their aid and say, I have no use for this. There is no form of sickness that would not be cured at once. And we saw that with, Jesus in his ministry when he told the guy who was lame, throw away your crutches, get up. And the guy, because he recognized the truth of what Jesus had shared, he did. He threw away his crutches, rolled up his mat, and headed off. And it works like that. If your doctor tells you, "Oh, you're well," and you're willing to accept that, then you're healed. If you're still in resistance to the idea of being well, then all the doctors in the world and all the pills and vaccines and everything else, the organic food, the this, the that, it's not going to help you. You have to be willing to confront these things and look at it from a higher level, from a higher perspective, and realize that you're doing this to yourself.
Yeah, and that could be a really enjoyable thing as long as you remember who you really are. If you know yourself as love, you know yourself as the way God created you, then then what you're doing for yourself is actually really enjoyable. But if what you're experiencing is not so enjoyable, then maybe look at, you know, your decision. Why are you deciding for that? Reclaim that so that you can change it and choose something different. Choose something more aligned with yourself.
That is the point of all this, is to realize that it is choice. And the choice is yours. And to the degree that you're not willing to accept responsibility for your choices, that's what your life is going to present to you.
Absolutely. And so we are on paragraph 3, which says, what is the single requisite for this shift in perception? It is simply this: the recognition that sickness is of the mind and has nothing to do with the body. What does this recognition cost? It costs the whole world you see, for the world will never again appear to rule the mind. For with this recognition is responsibility placed where it belongs, not with the world, but on him who looks on the world and sees it as it is not. He looks on what he chooses to see, no more and no less. The world does nothing to him. He only thought it did. Nor does he do anything to the world, because he was mistaken about what it is. Herein is the release from guilt and sickness both, for they are one. Yet to accept this release, the insignificance of the body must be an acceptable idea.
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
kind of an intense revelation there, because the truth is, if you place a lot of value on the body and all of your sensual experiences and the pleasure of this and the pleasure of that, and you're addicted to them, you're going to, at the same time, experience the dualistic nature of that. You're going to feel guilt for your addictions, and it's just going to get uglier and uglier and uglier. So we have to look at the body for what it is, a communication vehicle. And if we have momentary experiences that are pleasurable, appreciate them, but don't cling to them, and don't try to repeat them over and over and over again.
Right. Exactly. And the idea of, I feel like we're capitalizing on the idea of choice and decision here a lot today. So I want to keep going with that theme of the idea that really this is about claiming your power as the decision maker in your life. And so when you see that you're creating it one way, you're creating, like, it really comes down to the contrast between love and fear. And so you're either choosing to perceive in fear or in love. So that is what it all boils down to, in my perspective.
Well, yeah, it reduces down to, again, that core theme of duality. Living non-dualistically means that you have surrendered your willingness to follow the ego's will and desires, and recognize that your true will, your true desires, are God's will for you and God's will for everybody around you. And this is where we get back over and over again to the idea of oneness. There is only oneness. So you have to be willing to choose love for yourself and to be looking at the truth of who yourself is. It is every individual on the planet, or who has ever been on the planet, or who ever will be on the planet, without prejudice and, without any kind of discernment. This one's a little bit less than this one over here. We have to realize there's only one of us here. And that becomes a litany from those of us who are teachers of the Course, as well as students of the Course. But that is the core of the message, is that there's only one of us here. Every time you have an attack thought, every time you go out of your way to get revenge, to do a payback, you're punishing yourself. So you better start thinking about that.
Yeah, and thinking about why you're having that thought in the first place too. Why are you even going into that line of thinking?
Exactly. Yeah, it just gets uglier and uglier. So now we're down on 3. Or did you just do 3 here?
I just read paragraph 3. And are we on paragraph 4 of section
Yes.
2?
Right.
Okay.
And I think we'll, because
finish up with this one.
Yeah, as we're about to finish up here, that will leave us with section 3, the function of the teacher of God. So now that we have thoroughly confused all of our listeners, I will go ahead and read paragraph 4 of section 2. With this idea is pain forever gone, but with this idea goes also all confusion about creation. So again, we didn't create ourselves, and this puts a big highlight on that and helps us to understand that we didn't want to create ourselves to begin with. Does not this follow of necessity? Place cause and effect in their true sequence in one respect, and the learning will generalize and transform the world. The transfer value of one true idea has no end or limit. The final outcome of this lesson is a remembrance of God. What do guilt and sickness, pain, disaster, and all suffering mean now? Having no purpose, they are gone, and with them also go all the effects they seem to cause. Cause and effect but replicate creation. Seen in their proper perspective, without distortion and without fear, they re-establish heaven. Boy, that's a beautiful thought, to re-establish the presence of heaven. And not, in some trivial or mundane way, the streets of gold and pearly gates and all that baloney. But it reestablishes a state of being in which there is nothing but love.
Yeah, and that's really just establishing that in awareness, because that's what the reality is all the time anyway. So it's just always there, whether or not you accept it.
Yes, and it's really, ultimately, it's not even contingent upon you. You're not making it. It is already in existence, and you actually never left it. So you don't have to do anything to make this work. You just have to stop resisting it. And all of a sudden, it's like a well-filled helium balloon. You cut the tide that holds it down, and it goes heavenward. And that's exactly what happens with us. As soon as we cut our ties to all the grief and pain, we start to move heavenward.
Absolutely. I think that pretty much sums that up for today.
Yes, and that gives you an opportunity to go out and frolic in front of the house with that fantastic view that you guys have out there. So I imagine you'll be spending part of the day outdoors.
Yeah, absolutely. So it was, again, a pleasure to talk to you, Chris, and I guess we'll just pick up again next week.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to it. Oh, and definitely go to www.themiraclewithin. That's all one word. themiraclewithin.org, and you can check out what's going on with all of our different videos and all of our activities. So I will see you in a week, Stephen.
Absolutely excited too. Great week. Bye.
Bye.